Thank you. I'll say one more time. Thank you so much for joining Sub-Working Group 1.2, Trafficking of Synthetic Drugs. We will be recording our meetings up through the presentations and then stop for the commentary period. So the comments will not be, the discussion session will not be recorded, but the presentations will be. My name is Brian Morales. I'm the Chief of the Counter-Narcotics Branch at the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, or INL for short. Thank you so much for your interest in the Synthetic Drug Coalition and for participating in our meeting today. I'm going to start off with some quick administrative announcements. So I am going to share my screen. And I am going to put this on presentation mode. I hope you can all see presentation mode. If not, Cyril, you'll let me know.
We can see the presentation mode.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you very much for, once again, you can see our email address at the bottom, syntheticscoalition@state.gov, should you have any questions or needs as the work of the coalition moves forward. Today, this is the second of 4 sessions today, 1.2. This is part of the first working group on manufacturing and trafficking. We later have the other working group on detecting threats and emerging patterns with 2 additional meetings that will run consecutively following this one. And tomorrow we will have the public health sub-working groups as well. You'll see that there are 2 sessions, both this week and then next week on the 25th and 26th, which will be for the Eastern region. So this is the Western region meetings that cover Americas, Europe, Africa, Middle East, and then we'll have the Asia and Pacific meetings on October 25 and 26. Some administrative notes. Registration for the working groups remain open and will remain open for the duration of the coalition throughout the year. You can register following these links. Again, if you email us, we're happy to send you the links if you do not have them. There is also a website, a new website for the coalition that will be developed to facilitate communication. And all of the presentations from today will be recorded and posted on the coalition website. Once again, the comments will not be, the recording will stop after the presentations. We have identified and are very grateful for international organization colleagues to support us in a lot of the logistics and secretariat functions. So we have international organization coordinators that will serve as note takers and prepare meeting summaries at the end of every session, and we will compile those and share that with the membership. Additionally, in the next few weeks, the Secretariat, comprised once again of the international organizations and of INL, will be sending out the meeting schedule for the rest of the year, and also specifically calendar invites to all participants for the next few months so that you have the dates reserved for the next several months of meetings. And now finally, to conclude with the meeting schedule and how we're looking at establishing this. Today's session is very important. It's framing the issue, identifying sort of the state of play, but also looking at the major challenges that the international community faces in addressing the thematic issue that we're discussing today. What we're looking at between November and February is to very concretely share best practices, models, activities, programs, intervention points, and then from there, define deliverables and encourage countries, invite countries to make commitments to either initiating new lines of effort or expanding existing lines of effort that will be discussed during these critical months. We want the coalition to be one of action and results and be very concrete in its outcomes. So then in March, we will have a midterm coalition check-in. At that point, the working groups, the higher level 3 working groups will meet, and they'll receive reports from the sub-working groups in terms of progress that's been made. That will be followed between April through July for action planning and implementation of the coalition's work and the activities that are identified. And then we'll move on in August to evaluation, as well as transitioning for sustainability. And what we're expecting by the end of the coalition's work on the 5th of September, when we have the working group, the final working group meetings, is to have a final report that demonstrates the success of the coalition, but also to spin off or to then move these lines of efforts back into other international organizations or initiatives that are ongoing around the world, so that the activities of the coalition will continue long after the meetings of the coalition have concluded by the 5th and 6th of September. So that is a little bit on the administration, and I will stop sharing my screen now. Just to provide a quick introduction and handover, I'd like to once again thank international organizations. In this case, we have two international organization coordinators for this West group. One is Asma Fakhri, who's the Synthetic Drug Strategy Coordinator and Program Manager from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And she's actually sitting right here to my side. So I'll turn over the microphone to her in a moment to introduce herself. And then we also have Bob Vandenberg, who is the Deputy Head of Passenger and Cross-Border Team. And he's a law enforcement expert also at United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Vienna. So let me turn it over to Asma for her greeting.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you everyone for joining, and we're very happy to serve as the secretariat for this working group. We'll be supporting, of course, the co-chairs and everyone by taking notes and minutes of the discussions and sharing those back with the group through the coalition and the coalition website, etc. So pleasure being here. Again, I'm Asma Fakhri. I'm the coordinator of the UNODC Synthetic Drug Strategy, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bob.
Thank you so much, Asma, and a very good morning, Brian. Always good to see you back as well, and a very good morning to all. As mentioned, my name is Bob van den Bergen. I'm the deputy head of the Passenger and Cargo Border Team, a program, in fact, that makes efforts to enhance.
And Bob, my apologies, we're getting very garbled audio from you. Could you speak closer to the microphone, please, for the interpreters? Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, does this sound better?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. No, so again, very good morning. My name is Bob van den Bergen. I'm the deputy head of the Passenger and Cargo Border Team within the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. I'm based in Vienna. And our PCBT program, in fact, it's the result of the merger of probably two programs that are more familiar. One is ICOP and the other one is Frontier Control Program. And we are aiming to maximize, let's say, the effectiveness of both programs by combining their expertise and resources on both cargo and passenger control. Very happy to be here and to assist, and looking forward to work with all of you together. Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks, Asma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. And now I'd like to introduce our two co-chairs for today. First, from Poland, we have Michael Aleksandrowicz, who is the head of Organized Crime Drug Department from the Police Central Bureau of Investigations. And then we have George Pasiaskos, the Assistant Director from the New York Field Office of Customs and Border Patrol from New York in the United States. Let me turn it over to Michael.
Hello, good morning, Brian and dear colleagues. I would like to officially welcome all of you. As you have already heard from Brian, my name is Michał Aleksandrowicz. I'm the head of the Organized Drug Crime Department in the Police Central Bureau of Investigation. And in parallel, I'm also playing the role of the driver of the EU platform dedicated for the synthetic drugs and the new psychoactive substances under the flag of Impact. So I play both roles in Poland, but also in the EU in the construction of the operational action plans, which are in fact touching all the possible areas where the synthetic drugs appear. So I hope that during this couple of months, we'll have a lot of chances to work together and meet not only on this meeting within this initiative, but also on the side meetings. Now I would like to pass the floor to George Pasiaskos, who is the second co-chair. George, if you could please take the floor.
Hi, good morning. My name is George Pasiaskos. I'm the Assistant Director of Field Operations in New York. Was recently also the Senior Advisor to the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, particularly on the topic of synthetic narcotics. I currently oversee all enforcement activity in the New York area, which has the largest international airport in JFK and the fourth largest international airport in the United States in Newark. It has the largest seaport on the east coast of the United States, and also the largest international mail facility, which oversees about 60% of all the mail that comes into the United States as well. Also a extremely large cargo footprint at JFK, air cargo footprint, and of course the sea cargo footprint at Newark. CBP, or Customs and Border Protection, is involved in just about every aspect of interdiction of synthetics, from the precursors to the supply chain to the equipment that is used to manufacture these types of synthetics, and including the pill press, the dyes, and the financial movement. So anything that, again, crosses the border, CBP touches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for the introduction, and I hope that during this the lifetime of this initiative, we'll have a lot of chances to discuss the main issues which are related to the synthetic drugs problem, and to find the solutions, and identify also the activities that could be implemented during the lifetime of this initiative. Dear colleagues, I will have this privilege to chair this meeting today. Today, we also have the presentation about the Global Lights Campaign and challenges in the field of synthetic drugs. And today, this presentation will be provided to us by Mr. Michael Osman, who is the head of the Criminal Investigation and Analysis Project CIAP, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So, Michael, if you are available, please, the floor is yours and you can start your presentation, please.
I am. I hope you can all hear me reasonably well.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. I'm also calling from Vienna, where Bob is located. So thanks for letting me speak today. So my presentation will go through very quickly the kind of broad trends we're seeing with some of the major synthetic drugs. And where possible, I will try and draw in what we know about some of the groups that are doing the trafficking of these drugs. My project is designed to look at the criminal actors involved in trafficking of commodities, synthetic drugs not being one of those. And then I'll just end with some of the very brief challenges that we face in trying to tackle trafficking in this field. So let me just share my screen if I can. Sorry, 1 minute. Great, can you all see?
We can see your screen. Go ahead, please.
Excellent, thank you. So,
and my apologies, you may want to move your presentation, there we go, into the full screen mode. Thank you.
there we go. Is that better?
Actually,
Great.
I think your shared screen disappeared. Yes, we can see it now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So really, as I said, I'll go through very quickly some of the broad trends with synthetic drugs trafficking, and where possible, drill into the criminal networks involved. So really, I think it's fair to say that growth in synthetic drugs is well documented. We've seen a growing number of laboratories in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Near and Middle East, Africa, Europe, and North America, producing a range of synthetic drugs, including stimulants, depressants, and other novel dissociatives. So I think it's growing as a trend, unlike perhaps some other drug types. And really, to start looking at amphetamine type stimulants, I think really you can sort of see that here, predominantly based on the seizure data we have over the last few years, we tend to see the majority of the seizures in East and Southeast Asia, followed by North America. So very, very high levels of seizures of these types of drugs. And then to a lesser extent, the Near and Middle East and Southwest Asia, and far less in Western and Central Europe. Not to say that there aren't seizures of drugs of these types in these regions, but comparatively speaking, East and Southeast Asia tends to be where we see the bulk of the seizures. And in part, that's largely because of the large scale production of some of these amphetamine type stimulants in that region. And drilling down a bit further, breaking down into the sort of top 15 countries that we've seen amphetamine type stimulants seized. United States is the highest, followed by countries in Southeast Asia, Myanmar and Thailand, but then also Mexico, Middle East.
And Mike, my sincerest
Iran.
apologies for another interruption. Since we are recording this session, could you move your camera a little bit higher so that we can see
Yeah,
your
of course.
face in the frame? Thank you so very
Sorry.
much.
There you
Thank
go.
you so much.
Thank you.
Please continue. Thank you.
Not a problem. Moving on then quickly to opioids. I mean, I think I don't need to tell people about the opioid crisis in the United States, where we've seen over the last sort of 20 years a growth in the number of deaths as a result of opioids. Earlier on in that sort of 2-decade period, the majority of overdose deaths involving opioids came from any sort of opioid without fentanyl added to it. But sort of from 2014 onwards, you started to see an uptick in the number of overdoses of opioids with fentanyl. And as that developed over that decade to sort of 2021, we saw the proportion of deaths related to opioids with fentanyl increase significantly, as well as the general deaths from opioids increasing quite significantly, as you can see there. But one of the other sort of non-fentanyl opioids that we see quite often in other parts of the world, particularly North, West, and Central Africa, Middle East, and Southwest Asia, is tramadol. And there's been a significant misuse of that in many countries. And what we find with tramadol is that the gender divide in non-medical use is narrower than for other drugs. So, for example, if you look at heroin consumption in Afghanistan, for example, that is usually done by males, men and boys, whereas women tend to not use heroin and tend to use or misuse tranquilizers and sedatives. So quite a divide. We don't tend to see that divide as being so sharp in tramadol misuse. And we're starting to see problematic non-medical use of tramadol in sort of North Africa, Middle East, West Africa, where we're seeing large numbers of people reporting that they're using it and going into treatment for tramadol use. So it kind of suggests that it's spread as well. And you can really see that in the following chart. For example, in Sierra Leone, Niger, very high levels of treatment for people using tramadol and opioids rather than heroin and opiates. For ketamine, dissociative anesthetic, not really under international control, but used for medical purposes. The non-medical use of this has been used quite frequently in some countries in East and Southeast Asia. And really, the traffickers have begun to explore new ways to promote ketamine on the illicit market. So they tend to mix ketamine-containing mixtures with other ingredients that are not known to the users. And we've seen again this in other cases, for example, in Southern and Eastern Africa, where heroin is mixed with cannabis as a way of introducing it into the market. We're seeing this with ketamine as well. And the quantities of ketamine really have been going up over the last, again, 15 years, with a peak in sort of 2015, and a slight shift as well. So up until sort of 2017, significant amount of the seizures took place in China. But now we're sort of seeing changes towards places such as Hong Kong and other parts of Southeast Asia. So a slight shift there. with regarding new psychoactive substances, in 2021, 618 substances were reported to be on the global market, and 87 of those were newly identified just in that year. And so I think that's one of the challenges I'll come back to towards the end. But we do see a number of new psychoactive substances from opioids tending to stabilize. They're not growing as much. And even a possibility of a decline in the fentanyl analogs following previous year-on-year increases. And really this can be seen sort of in the chart below that hallucinogen type drugs and other NPS haven't really changed between 2015 and 2021 in the proportions that they use. Is still around 15% for hallucinogens and 13 to 16% for other NPS. But what we have seen is a swing towards synthetic opioids from 2015 to 2021, going from about 3% to 14%. One of the other drugs that we see quite often is Captagon, which continues to grow in the Near and Middle East. And quite often this is confused with amphetamine, but assuming that some or all of the amphetamine seizures in the sub-region are actually Captagon, not amphetamine, then really we've seen a doubling of seizures from 2020 to 2021, with a record high of 86 tons seized in 2021. So very, very high levels of production of this drug, principally in the Middle East, Near and Middle East. And really that's produced in the Levant, so Syria and Arab Republic and Lebanon, with destinations principally for the users in the Gulf countries, reached either directly by land or sea, or more indirectly through other regions such as Southern Europe. And as well as Captagon, there does appear to be a methamphetamine market seeming to develop in the Near and Middle East. And I'll come back to methamphetamine in a moment. But the Captagon trafficking networks, as I say, is produced in the Middle East, and the number of Middle Eastern actors tend to be involved in both production and trafficking. And this can be a combination of state actors within the Levant, but also militia groups and militant groups. The conflict in Syria has led to a proliferation of militia and militant groups who are involved in the trade as well as state actors, but also business people who facilitate the trade as well. Some production of Captagon does occur in Europe, for example, in the Netherlands, but this is still relatively small compared to the Levant. And some of the trafficking doesn't necessarily follow the direct route. So, for example, there's been a case in 2022 of Captagon produced in the Levant that was actually trafficked to Europe, only to then go back to the Arabian Peninsula, specifically Saudi Arabia. And really, to look at it in sort of visual terms, you can see the major flows there. Obviously, land routes from the Levant into Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, but also sea routes to Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the other Middle Eastern countries in the Gulf. In 2022, we also saw some cases of individual seizures that were going to Tunisia, Morocco, and Nigeria, Sierra Leone. Those are one-off cases, but may indicate that actually trafficking is going further afield than just the Middle East and Europe. I mentioned earlier methamphetamine. So finally, really, the other synthetic drugs that we see a lot of is methamphetamine trafficking, principally from Afghanistan now. Afghanistan had always been associated with heroin and opiates, but given the decline in, or the expected decline in cultivation this year, and the return of the Taliban to power that in effect led to that decline. What we've also seen is a subsequent growth in the production of methamphetamine in Afghanistan. And that drug is trafficked obviously within the region, so Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, for example, and the neighboring countries, Iran and Pakistan, but also much further afield to the Middle East, parts of Southeast Asia, and increasingly Africa, Tanzania, Mozambique. There's a number of maritime and naval forces operating in the Indian Ocean that are seizing not just heroin from Afghanistan, but also methamphetamine. And that then heads to southern and eastern Africa. And while heroin seizures in Afghanistan and the neighboring countries were quite high over the last decade or so, the majority of which was seized by Iran and Pakistan, what we've also seen is an increase in methamphetamine seizures over that decade, really starting to pick up in 2018 and going quite high, to the extent that in 2021, methamphetamine seizures in Afghanistan and the neighboring countries was almost as high as heroin seizures. It's a little difficult now to monitor what's going on in Afghanistan regarding methamphetamine following the return to power of the Taliban, but it's still a major producer of methamphetamine. And as an example of that, in 2017, 2.5 tons of methamphetamine produced in Afghanistan was seized in the country and the neighboring countries, and that shot up in about 5 years to almost 30 tons. As I said, the seizures in the Indian Ocean tend to confirm that it's that the methamphetamine trafficked there to Africa is produced in Afghanistan. There's some forensic testing of that. I think the US does some, the Australians do some more, the UK and Germany do test methamphetamine to see if it is originating in Afghanistan. And really, as an example of the methamphetamine trafficking groups, you have the producers in Afghanistan, and to a lesser extent, Southwest Asia. Production in Afghanistan seemed to have developed from producers in Southwest Asia moving into Afghanistan to produce there. But once the drug is produced, it is then trafficked frequently via maritime means to Africa via dhows, which traffic methamphetamine with mixed loads of heroin. The crews are generally Southwest Asian, the crews on the dhows, but actually the deals tend to be brokered and coordinated outside of that Southwest Asia region, frequently in the Middle East, and the planning and coordination of those shipments is done there. And when the methamphetamine reaches sort of southern and eastern Africa, Southwest Asian diasporas facilitate the movement onwards. And what we think then happens is once it reaches sort of southern Africa and South Africa, methamphetamine is handed over to West African crime groups for onward trafficking. But really the question then is where? So, I mean, I mentioned the forensic capabilities earlier, which show that it's Afghan meth being trafficked along the Indian Ocean. But within the European Union, there's very little evidence to suggest that the meth consumed there is from Afghanistan. Testing capabilities in Africa are limited, and there's not much sign of meth use in Africa itself. So really then, where does all of this methamphetamine that is being produced go, and where is it being trafficked to? And that remains an open question. And I think really that leads me on to sort of some of the key points about why it's so difficult to kind of combat the trafficking of synthetic drugs by, say, heroin or cocaine. And I think in part that's down to the fact that for certain drug types, things like NPS, they evolve quite quickly. And so legislation can be put in place to block the production of certain types of drugs. But traffickers and producers can change that quite quickly. And it can then be trafficked without law enforcement being totally aware of what the new drug is. And compared to, say, cocaine and opiates, heroin and morphine, for example, you don't tend to need the same production levels. You don't need sort of large amounts of cultivation to produce the drugs. They can be produced very quickly using chemicals in out-of-the-way labs. And many of these synthetic drug labs, for example, if you look at Captagon and methamphetamine, the production takes place in areas of conflict or instability, which are very hard for law enforcement to act on. And finally, the sort of size of the drugs, the synthetic drugs that are produced, also tends to make it very difficult to track and trace. You're not moving kilogram loads and ton loads of heroin or cocaine. It's thousands of pills that have a strong impact in the way that opiates and cocaine would require a bigger dose. So I think all of this makes it very challenging to track and come up with policies and approaches on how best to tackle the groups that are trafficking in synthetic drugs. So I think I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to take any questions. Over to you.
Michael, thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation. I think that this point that you have touched in your presentation, they are very important from this global perspective of the synthetic drugs. I have also this experience in my, I would say, professional career, where I observed this issue from the perspective of the EU member state, and I have to say that many common points are identified and in our, I would say, annual work plan. I have to especially underline the issue of the Captagon, which I think is very important, like you said already, from the perspective of the conflicts, because the production sites, like you have mentioned, they are located in the places where the law enforcement agencies have got a lot of the problems to go there and to, I would say, facilitate the operations which are going to tackle the illicit drug production laboratories. But I have to say, from this knowledge that we have under the impact platform dedicated for the synthetic drugs and the NPS, because I drafted at the beginning of September the light report from the progress of our annual operation action plan, and we have already found that our colleagues from Germany have conducted successfully the operation in July, when they have arrested 2 Syrian nationals who were producing the Captagon in Germany. So this is not something that is happening only at that place. Of course, this is not the scale like we observe, for example, in Syria. But still, we also have to be aware that this kind of production took place, in fact, everywhere. I think that this is also very important that you have mentioned the topic of the methamphetamine, which is a really global problem. We see, like you already said, the problem of the Afghanistan, but we also have to touch the topic of the EU, where also the production of the methamphetamine take place. Sometimes also with the, I would say, criminal counterparts originating from the Latin America, because this is also something that we see currently in this intelligence picture. I think that this is a right question that you have asked in your presentation about the West African organized crime groups. Where does go this methamphetamine, which is trafficked, which is passed to these crime groups, and where does it go? To which countries? To which regions? I think that this is a good question to the audience. Regarding the typical production of the synthetic drugs, I agree totally with you that this is a process that if you produce not a very big quantities of the synthetic drugs, it taken place everywhere. So this sometimes, for example, when we speak because it was not mentioned in your presentation, the synthetic catenols. So the substances like the mephedrone, clefedrone, these substances can be produced everywhere with the chemical substances and the essential chemicals which are available on the stock markets. So this is not something which makes a lot of the problem to the criminals. I have to say that in this year, in my country, in Poland, we have seized, I think, only by my agency until today. I think it's something around 8 or 9 tons of clefedrone. So this is really quite a lot. And in the biggest production facility, we seized almost 4 tons of clefedrone. So I think that this is also quite huge amount. And maybe during our discussions on the further meetings, I think that my colleagues from my agency will be also more than happy to present you this topic, because this is also something which might pop up in the many of the countries at the global level. At the beginning of your presentation, you have also mentioned the tramadol and the ketamine. This is also the serious problem that we observe, as well as the misuse, I think, of the different kind of medicinal products which contain synthetic opioids, which are trafficked on this global market. Many of them originate from the legitimate market. They are not forged, and this is also caused a lot of the problems for the law enforcement to trace this kind of cases, where the organized crime groups, the DTOs, in fact, they are facilitating for this criminal facilitating use of the postal and courier services, which cause a lot of the issues to the law enforcement, especially to the customs and the border guards colleagues, because they are not able to control in simple way all the packages incoming and outgoing from the countries. So we are really fully aware of this, and I think that this is also a good topic for the further discussion. What can we do in this area? I have to say that I already have got one comment to this, because I think that the very good solution that we have already identified in the EU, in the Impact platform, is the use of the, and maybe not the use, maybe this is not a proper word, to come together closer with the private sector. I mean the companies which are running the business dedicated to the delivery of the packages. We also organize the trainings and the expert meetings together with them, because their problem is also our problem, because according to the regulations, also the transportation of the different kind of illicit good is forbidden. And from our perspective, this is a crime. So we got a lot of common point of interest, I think. So maybe this will be also a good point for the discussion for the further meetings. Once again, Michael, thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation. I think that this is a very good general overview of this, what we can find globally. Now I would like to give the floor to George Pasiakos, my co-chair. George, if you also would like to comment on this presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mike. That was an excellent starting point. I think a good overview of what currently is going on. I won't speak too long. I'll only discuss really for our side what we're looking at here in the United States. As you know, we have a large problem with fentanyl. And so fentanyl over the years, you showed on your graph, has grown. And just this past year alone, we doubled the amount of fentanyl we seized just from last year. It's the only drug that we've done this with, including methamphetamines. Although the amount of methamphetamine still coming into the United States is a large problem. And so, yeah, again, as mentioned earlier, and I'll highlight, if you study the methamphetamine issues from over the last 20 years, as we've been legislating the chemicals that go into making it, and I believe you mentioned that the drug trafficking organizations simply go down to the next precursor chemical to make it. Once we legislate that drug, they go to the next one, and we're seeing the exact same thing with fentanyl. The only other thing we have seen is the mixing of these synthetics together. Fentanyl in and of itself, we're not seeing a lot of pure fentanyl caught on the street. It's mixed into cocaine. It's mixed into heroin. We're seeing a low amount of fentanyl being introduced into the all different narcotics. And so, that's also getting people addicted. The biggest trend right now that we're seeing is the two synthetics that are mixed together is fentanyl and xylazine. Fentanyl is obviously an opiate, and it works with Narcan. Narcan can reverse the effects. However, xylazine, not being an opiate, does not reverse the effects of an overdose. So we've got people overdosing on 2 different drugs at the same time. You inject them with Narcan, and the Narcan doesn't work. They're really overdosing on the xylazine, and we're seeing that mixed in at the street level of fentanyl. But at this point, I think what we'll do is we'll turn it over to the group. You'll see on your right hand a reactions button. If you click that, you should be able to raise your hand, and then Mr. Alexander will call on you, and we'll open up the floor to everyone else.
Okay, dear colleagues, any questions, comments? I see the first